The women in Johnny's orbit were obsessed with him. He seemed to be like a drug. They couldn't break the addiction. He would make a point of singling one out and love bombing them nearly to make them feel $1 million, and they're just swooning at this Johnny Creswell. He loved it. You know, he was the centre of attention.
He wasn't good academically. He made up for that on horseback. He was seen as, you know, a bit of a rock star. He was almost like a magician with women. He was able to control and manipulate them as if he was playing a hand of cards. Nobody knew the secrets of his world.
So, Pat, you had a story this weekend about how a man who's been convicted of murder had actually previously rang into a Gerry Ryan show to talk about, I suppose, about his fantasies about harming women. But it's a very sad case that he's actually been convicted of. Give us kind of a background of what happened and how this woman died.
Yeah, well, as you say, it is a very tragic case. Last Friday, George Turner was convicted of the murder of Dublin woman Emma McCroary. Now, she was 45 years old. She was a mother of two, and she passed away in a house fire on the Holt Road 10 days before Christmas in 2022. Neighbours spotted smoke coming from the apartment. They rang the emergency services. The emergency services arrived, put out the fire, got into the apartment, and Emma tragically was found dead in her bed.
Now, I actually, of course, knew her, and I don't remember the death notice coming on. I knew her as Emma Costello, obviously before she'd been married, back in the dark and distant past, it has to be said at this stage, but in the 90s I would have known her like a really like a stunning looking young woman. She would have been very much one of those people, and it's a bit of a cliche, sort of lights up the room, just no doubt about it, you know. She was living around Sandymount at the time. I knew her quite well. Other people I know would have stayed in touch with her over the years. She certainly was one of those bright, shiny people, like just a absolutely, you know, somebody that just a very charismatic woman. But she'd obviously had struggled in recent times, and I had heard that over the years. And this really had how she'd end up in touch with this guy, George Turner, who would ultimately be convicted of her murder.
Yeah, well, 3 months before Emma passed away, she started going out with George Turner, and he was somebody who, say the very least, led a chaotic lifestyle. He'd been on the Garda radar for petty offences for going back over the last 2 decades. Nothing extremely serious. A few years before, he was caught with firearms and a quantity of drugs, but most of his offences would have been dealt with at district court level.
So he was really like a sort of a street drug addict rather than a sort of gangland criminal. And I know that is
chaotic character rather than a significant criminal. So Turner would have met or would have become involved with Emma about 3 months beforehand. Now, this was at a stage where Emma's own mother told the trial that Emma was vulnerable, and she became involved with him. By the day that she died, he was already using her bank card. He'd used her bank card that day to go out and buy alcohol, and then went to the bookies. And Turner was the person who alerted the neighbours to smoke coming out of the window of the apartment block. Now, he had a mobile phone. He didn't ring 999 himself, which I suppose was a red flag in the very beginning. After the post-mortem was done, it turned out that Emma had died of smoke inhalation. The Garda Technical Bureau had established that the fire had started on the bed, that the bed closed. And at that stage, I suppose it may have looked like that this was, maybe a cigarette had set the bed on fire.
Yeah, because I know when I did hear about this in the aftermath, and she had then been buried, before somebody spoke to me about it, who'd known her. Like, people didn't know that this was a possible murder investigation. Now, these are people kind of on the edge of her life who would have known her in the past. There may well have been people who were like maybe her family, or really people that were, speaking to her every day, might have known there was suspicions. But certainly a lot of people at the time just thought it was one of those, a cigarette catches fire and it's in a chaotic situation. But obviously the guards were looking at Turner because they seem to have had some information about the money, for example.
Yeah, well, I think from an early stage, the guards do investigate debts of this nature. And in this particular case, they established quite quickly that Turner was using the bank card. They spoke with Turner. Turner initially denied having any knowledge of the fire. It wasn't until almost 3 months later that he told a friend of his, or an associate, he said, I burnt Emma. And he told his friend that he wanted to take Emma out of her pain. And subsequently, he did go into Clontarf Garda Station. He voluntarily went in and he gave a statement. And according to this statement, he said that Emma had no quality of life and he wanted to take her away from it. He said things like, I'm sorry she passed away, but I would do it again. After he was cautioned, this kind of sentiment, it changed. And suddenly it moved on to, I didn't mean to kill her. I thought she'd wake up. I thought the apartment would be damaged and she'd get evicted and that she would come and live with me. So since that time, Turner has been in custody. And what came out at the sentencing hearing last Friday was that since he's been in custody, according to his solicitor, Philip Rann, Turner is now drug-free. He was somebody who suffered with serious mental health problems and had a history of abusing the medication he was given to deal with those mental health problems. But since he's been in custody, he's managed to be drug-free and is now doing a whole lot better.
Now, obviously, as you described there, that narrative of where he went in and voluntarily made a statement and then kind of rolled back on it. But ultimately, he pled guilty to murder.
He did, and that's something Philip Rann said again. Yeah. He said, look, there was never any question but that he was going to plead guilty to murder, and he did go on to make that statement himself. But I suppose you have to counterbalance that then with the things that Emma's mother, Pauline, said.
Well, exactly. I mean, this is so... I mean, he's given a statement about taking her out of her misery or whatever, and that doesn't sort of get challenged because he's given a guilty plea and that's read out. So the family or the prosecutors don't have to, get into the nuts and bolts of that.
No, I suppose all they can do is give a victim impact statement, which Emma's mother, Pauline, did. And she said that George Turner had stole Emma from her 2 children. And she spoke about the fact that Emma was, much as you said, she was somebody who lit up the room. She was somebody who was adored by her family, her friends, by everybody who knew her. She actually gave one very, very tragic aspect of this was that at the time Emma died, her father was in the final stages of Parkinson's, and her mother had to go in and visit him every day after Emma's death and wasn't able to bring herself to tell him that his beloved daughter was dead. So obviously George Turner got his chance in court and his solicitor gave his side of it, but the other side of it is George Turner's actions are extremely malevolent.
Yeah, of course. And you have to say, look, I mean, I haven't seen her in many years, but and maybe she was in a really difficult circumstance, but for somebody some random person who's known her for a period of months to make that decision that her life isn't worth living, I mean, it's, it's inexcusable.
And we only have George Turner's word for that.
Yeah, and I do understand that's his statement, and the prosecutors read it out and the cops and all that, but that woman, she absolutely would have, could have had many other chances to get her life back on track, and obviously leaves a couple of kids, who have had to hear all of these things said about her. But I can tell you, you can see in that picture, that sort of smiley face, and that is actually how I remember her, as being one of those people who, just would make other people smile.
Yeah, and that's something that was reflected in Pauline's statement. This was a different Emma to the one that was portrayed by George Turner.
Absolutely, and I mean, as smart as you come, and George Turner, obviously, there's statements given in mitigation about his battles with mental illness and all of that. But you came across this old case, which really shows, it really makes you wonder, are we dealing with people like that properly? Because it was, and I actually remember it at the time when it came out, he had rang Gerry Ryan basically admitting that he wanted to
harm women.
Yeah. I mean, what year was that, and tell us the circumstances there?
Well, it goes back to 2009. At the time, Gerry Ryan was running one of the biggest radio shows in the country. Everybody kind of knew him as a shock jock and a larger-than-life character, but the other side of it was that people would ring in with their personal problems. They would send in letters. So on this particular day, George Turner rang in and said that he was having a crisis, that he had broken into a house, that he was having fantasies about harming women, and that he had broken into this house intent on acting out those fantasies. Now, this call never went on air because obviously the production team at Gerry Ryan were very, very concerned about it. So as soon as the call ended, they rang the local Gardaí. The story was checked out, the dates, and they did establish that a robbery had taken place at the venue George Turner had said one had taken place in. So the Gardaí contacted Turner. He was arrested and he was charged with breaking or with carrying out or trespassing with intent to commit an assault. And several months later, in 2010, he appeared in court. Tragically, as we all know, by that stage, Gerry Ryan had passed away. He had passed away in the April, and this was in June. So it was a detective sergeant who gave evidence about the phone call to the Gerry Ryan show.
Yeah. And so do we know much about George Turner since? Has he's seems to have picked up a lot of these sort of drug-related convictions, I think.
Well, we know a bit, but only it's sporadic because you're following court appearances, and there was many of them. He clocked up 42 convictions in between. But I suppose what was telling in that particular case was that when George Turner said, "Yes, I broke into the house. I was intent on harming a woman." When he was walking past this house, he was on his way to meet a friend of his. He saw a light on upstairs and took the opportunity to break into the house. There wasn't a woman in the house, thankfully. There was a man in the house. When he walked downstairs, he was alerted by the fact his internet was switched off suddenly. So he went down to check out the internet. The modem had been switched out. And as he was walking through, there was George Turner with a pillowcase over his head, and Turner turned and fled. The guards didn't have a suspect for that until again, George Turner confessed what he had done to Gerry Ryan. And he got a 2-year suspended sentence for that, which was why probably it didn't feature more heavily in the previous convictions when they were mentioned in court last week. But since 2009 and all the way through to now, 2025, George Turner clocked up, I think it was 42 convictions, many of them for low-level stuff. But I suppose the kind of the poignant thing about George Turner is that back in 2009, in that trial, his wife addressed the court, and she said that for 16 years George Turner had been a good husband and a good father, and then he had been diagnosed with depression. And after he was diagnosed with depression, he was given prescription medication, and he started abusing that medication. And slowly but surely, he morphed into this chaotic character that we all learned about, sadly, in the case of Emma McCroary.
And of course, that has very tragic consequences, and you have to wonder, is there a point at which, there could have been a better intervention? And,
I think, when you look at a case like this, you're always going to be looking for those moments when, these sliding door moments. What if there'd been a more proactive approach taken here? But it does appear that efforts were made to help George Turner. Even just before he had broken into that house in November 2009, he was only out of a psychiatric institution. I suppose you can help people to a degree, and you can always help people better. But in this case, it does appear that significant efforts were made to help him
No,
over
of
the
course,
years.
and the person has to meet that help and engage with it fully. But it's a very sad story, and our best wishes to Emma's family and to her
Absolutely.
kids in particular. Thanks, Pa.